And we are live on YouTube. We are live on TikTok. How we doing, everyone? We are heading into week 11 in a lot of leagues. The trade deadline is about to come up. In some leagues, in one of my high stakes leagues, the trade deadline was last week. In most of my leagues, the trade deadline is this week. I think in the majority of leagues that have trade deadlines, it's in the next couple of weeks. It is the final time, really, to lock in and do everything we can to win our fantasy football championships. There is only so much we can do to increase our odds at winning our fantasy leagues. It starts with draft day, the start sits all season, making the right ad drops, and ultimately, a lot of times, what it comes down to is, did you make the right league winning trades? That's what we're going to be really focused on today on the live stream. We're going to be talking about some of the waiver ads this week. There are finally some pretty decent waiver ads. It's been a little bit since we've had, I think, some league winning potential on the waiver wire. We're going to get to and really focus on the comments today. This is going to be a little bit less structured than what this Tuesday night live stream has been in past weeks, where I go game by game and talk about the biggest takeaways from every week. I will talk about some of the bigger takeaways as we go through it tonight, but we're going to hop right into the comments. I want to know what you guys are thinking about for your teams in your leagues. What ad drop decisions, what trade decisions are you thinking through? We are live on TikTok. We are live on YouTube, and we will be analyzing a ton of trades on the YouTube live. I can't share my screen on TikTok live, so watching live on TikTok, come to the YouTube live. Link's right in the TikTok bio. I got a comment here on YouTube. What do I do with CeeDee Lamb? I'm 9-1. First off, let's go. I mean, you are in the playoffs already. You should only be thinking about the playoffs if you're 9-1. I clinched playoffs in the first league this past week. Right now, I'm in the hunt. All 8 of my high stakes fantasy leagues, I remain in the hunt or in the playoffs. Feeling pretty good about that. But yeah, if you're 9-1, you got to be optimizing for the playoffs. And I really don't think now's the time to sell CeeDee Lamb. I've seen a comment here about Mike Evans in the rest of the season ranks. We'll get to Mike Evans here in a second. I think I probably would take, personally, CeeDee Lamb over Mike Evans rest of season. Let me pull up our projections here. But yeah, CeeDee Lamb, bad week this week in week 10. This was his worst performance in the history of his career with over 30% target share. But guys, he still had a 35% target share. He still had 10 targets. He has a great schedule rest of season. I'm buying CeeDee Lamb. I'm not selling CeeDee Lamb, and I'm holding him too if I have him, because you're selling low right now. If you try to sell CeeDee Lamb, if anything, I'm trying to buy low on CeeDee Lamb. I do think CeeDee Lamb still can be a league-winning wide receiver for fantasy. He has the Texans on deck. We talked about why we were in on the Devontae props last Thursday night when the Jets played the Texans. The Texans have been killed by slot receivers this whole season. I mean, crushed. I think CeeDee Lamb will benefit from this matchup this week specifically too. So someone asked about Mike Evans. Yeah, he's really high up in the Walter Picks rest of season rankings. I don't agree personally with this ranking. I think it'll likely move down a little bit as we continue to look at these throughout the week. But Mike Evans does have a pretty intriguing fantasy playoff schedule against the Cowboys in week 16, the Panthers in week 17. I also do think that the Buccaneers are going to do everything they possibly can to get Mike Evans to 1,000 receiving yards. And it's not going to be easy. He's at like around 300 so far this season. He needs to average almost 100 yards per game if he comes back this week, which I don't think is a guarantee, but I do think we see Mike Evans back this week, which is part of the reason he's going to jump up a lot in the rest of the season ranking. Same thing with Nico Collins. Nico Collins right now is at number 1. I think he should probably be at 2 or 3. But guys, Nico's right in the mix to be the number 1 overall wide receiver rest of season. He ranks number 2 in fantasy points per game so far this season. He leads the NFL. At least he leads wide receivers, I think all positions, in receiving yards per game, 113 yards per game. I think a lot of people have forgot about how good Nico's start to the season was. I certainly haven't forgot it. He gets a matchup against the Ravens in week 17 in the fantasy football finals. He projects as a top 2 wide receiver all of the fantasy football playoff weeks. I mean, there is a case for Nico being the wide receiver 1 overall. I think I'd probably take Chase over him after the week we just saw from Chase, a 55-point bomb, third 50-plus point bomb of his career. He doesn't have the worst matchup in week 16, but Chase does have kind of scary matchups. Week 17 against the Broncos, Pat Surtain. He's pretty matchup proof, I would say. But the schedule's not great for Chase rest of season. He gets the Chargers this week. They rank top 2 against receivers, against the Broncos in the fantasy finals. Will B-Rob play Thursday night? I kind of lean towards no. It's a short week, so I kind of lean towards B-Rob not playing, but we'll obviously have to see. Sam, I have CeeDee and DJ Moore. Am I cooked? No, I don't think you're cooked, Andrew. I don't think you're cooked if you have CeeDee. And honestly, I'm buying all of the Bears receivers right now. Specifically, Rome Odunze and DJ Moore are the 2 receivers that I definitely am interested in on the Bears. Let me pull this up here. Go to the start sit tool for a sec. The Bears have one of the better schedules rest of season. They fired their offensive coordinator, thank God. So it'll be a different guy calling the plays. I don't think that instantly fixes all the issues for the Bears, but it should at least give them some potential to have some better play calling and just offensive scheme. And then you look at the schedule. Look at the schedule for the Bears. It's hard not to get excited about these receivers when you peek ahead at the rest of the season schedule. They might have the best wide receiver schedule rest of the season. Let me pull up on the TikTok live. I took a screenshot of the rest of the season schedule. So this is by position. This shows what, if you're watching live on TikTok, I can pull this up actually on YouTube as well. Let me pull this up on YouTube too. This was from a tweet I saw from Mike Clay. I'll share a screen to this on the YouTube live as well, so we can all look at this together. But this gives a sense of how hard someone's schedule has been so far this season, and then how hard the schedule is going to be rest of season. All right, we got it up on screen. So the schedule has been for the Bears. If you go to the Bears in the wide receiver column, they've had the 13th easiest schedule. They have the 2nd easiest schedule among receivers rest of season. Yeah, so I'm buying DJ Moore. I'm buying Rome Odunze. I'm most nervous, honestly, about Keenan. It does feel like Keenan's just lost a little bit of juice so far this season. We've seen flashes from Odunze. I think DJ Moore's young enough and had enough explosiveness last season to still think it's there. We haven't really seen it from him all season. But yeah, honestly, I'm buying DJ Moore and Rome Odunze, and I'm holding them too. And I don't think you're cooked if you have CeeDee Lamb. He had a 35% target share this week. So I don't hate it. Oh, sorry, this is really small. I'm seeing on the YouTube live. Let me pull this up on the YouTube live quick so you guys can see. Shakir or Pearsall? Yeah, it's close. We got to see what happens with the Bills receivers this week. Let me switch back to the high-level takes here. I get Hurts and Tracy for Jefferson. I already have Nico, Neighbors, A.J. Brown. You have Nico, Neighbors, and A.J. Brown. Yeah, you should trade a receiver. I don't hate it. I mean, you're like, I like the trade for the other side too, getting Jefferson here. But you can't start Jefferson, Neighbors, A.J. Brown, and Nico. So you should try to trade one of them to upgrade your other positions. I think that makes a lot of sense. Thoughts on Tyreek? Yeah, I'm definitely in close to panic mode with Tyreek Hill. Let me share screen to the app again here on the YouTube live, and we'll take a look at this. It came out last night that Tyreek Hill's been dealing with a torn ligament in his wrist, and it's weird because watching the game, doesn't seem like he's dealing with an injury, but I do believe he's dealing with a partial tear or full tear in his wrist. And that partially explains the season we've seen from Tyreek. On top of the Tua injury, obviously, you kind of have to throw out all of these games without Tua to some extent. But guys, we haven't seen Tyreek Hill score more than 14 PPR points since week 1. It's been since week 1. He's got a decent fantasy playoff schedule, but man, and the Dolphins are, in the playoff hunt, which is good for Tyreek. They're not selling, they're not tanking yet. They have a pretty good winnable schedule the next 2 games at least too, so they should stay in the playoff hunt, which is good. But yeah, it's tough to get super excited about Tyreek right now. It's hard to sell him too. I think you kind of have to hold on to Tyreek. Tyreek's in a difficult spot for fantasy as well, where you almost have to, you can't drop him obviously, and you almost have to start him. Like if you have him, you almost have to start him. But you can't really trade him for anything. I mean, it's a really rough spot. You're kind of backed into a corner a bit if you have Tyreek. Why Lamb and Brooks? Yeah, so I still think Brooks is a buy and a hold. I'm not selling or dropping Jonathan Brooks right now if I'm looking likely to make the fantasy playoffs. My opinion on Brooks has not changed. And I know a lot of people were high on Brooks this season. Obviously, the price you had to pay during draft season was way too high. He has not played yet. This was not a good pick for fantasy. This has not been a guy that's helped your fantasy team. I never, though, expected Jonathan Brooks to help my fantasy teams. At this point in the season, I was still expecting zeros from Jonathan Brooks. I sort of hoped to be a little bit surprised by that expectation and for him to be at least playing at this point, it's been as bad of a run out for Jonathan Brooks as we can get. And there's still a chance Jonathan Brooks does not play this season. But his price is so low. He is so easy to go acquire. A lot of people are considering dropping him, which I don't think is unreasonable heading into his bye week. I think you got to hold on to him for at least 2 more weeks, though. And I still think he is a buy because you look at the fantasy playoff schedule for the Panthers. They have the best running back playoff schedule after the Cardinals. Who James Conner and Trey Benson, one of those 2 guys is going to win fantasy leagues this year. But I also think Chuba Hubbard or Jonathan Brooks, these guys have a good chance too. They get the Cowboys, the Cardinals, and the Bucs in the fantasy playoffs. Jonathan Brooks is a very talented running back. I believe he's fully healthy. The question is, how much incentive do they have to really give a big workload to Brooks? Obviously, Chuba Hubbard's been playing well. At this point, it feels like Brooks is sort of a high upside handcuff stash. I think he's likely we see him in week 12, though. I think you got to hold on to him until we see him. And again, the playoff schedule makes him rosterable for sure. I think he can win leagues. Don't pay too much, obviously, for Jonathan Brooks. Pickens or D-Hop? Yeah, it's got to be Pickens, man. Pickens projects top 5. Should I give DK for Pickens? Yeah, I think we got – this is a close one. Let's see. Let's look at the wide receiver rest of season rankings here. Pickens is ahead of DK Metcalf. Metcalf's pretty low. Where is he? Let's find him. So wide receiver 23. We got Metcalf. We got Pickens all the way up to wide receiver 12, top 12 wide receiver rest of the season right now. Pickens is balling, man. He's going to explode versus the Ravens, and he has such a good schedule rest of season 2. He gets the Ravens this week. He also gets the Ravens in the fantasy playoffs. Tough matchup versus the Chiefs in that last game, but man, his skill set just matches Russ so well. George Pickens, wide receiver 5 this past week, 5 catches, 91 yards, and a TD. So yeah, I think I would go Pickens over Metcalf. And let's just peek at the Seahawks schedule too. The schedule for Pickens is great. The role is obviously great. Metcalf has more target competition. He's also just been out for a little while. Man, we have him and JSN pretty close rest of the season. He gets a decent start to the fantasy playoffs. Metcalf definitely has league-winning upside still. He should be back this week. Is Ridley that guy? Yeah, I've been asking myself the same thing with Calvin Ridley. This week, I had a dynasty league trade. My highest stake league is a dynasty league. And I had a trade on the table to send Will Levis and Ridley Stack for Caleb Williams. And I ended up backing out, looking at what Calvin Ridley's been doing. And it's really the usage for Calvin Ridley that gets me excited. Look at this usage for Calvin Ridley. He has at least 8 targets, guys, in 5 straight games. He is number 3 in the NFL in air yards. He's gone over 120 air yards in 5 straight games. He's not just getting consistent targets. He's getting consistent deep targets down the field. They're using him very creatively in this offense right now. It gives him a extremely high ceiling and a pretty good floor too. I actually think the floor for Ridley is a bit underrated with this volume. And then you look at the schedule. Look at the schedule for the Titans. The Titans, if I go back to this really quick on the TikTok live, I won't go back to it on the YouTube live, but the Tennessee Titans, sorry, they're really low, so you can't even see it on the TikTok live. They've had the 3rd hardest schedule for quarterbacks so far this season, the 4th easiest rest of season. For wide receivers, they're going from the hardest schedule so far this season to the easiest schedule the rest of the season. They're going from the hardest to the easiest. And we've just seen Calvin Ridley ball against a good secondary. Now he gets the Vikings on tap and the Texans, Commanders, Jags, Bengals, Colts, Jags again. I mean, this is a great run out. We got a revenge game for Calvin Ridley in the fantasy football finals. I'm in, man. I'm in on Calvin Ridley. I think he's a buy. I'm not selling high on Ridley. I think that in a lot of leagues too, people would be interested in selling high on Calvin Ridley. I still think there's a lot of people who have a sour taste in their mouth about Calvin Ridley with how he started the season and sort of his boom bust profile over the last couple of years. But since DeAndre Hopkins has been gone, he's been in arguably one of the top 10 wide receiver roles in the league, maybe top 5. Again, he's number 3 in air yards. He ranks 13th best in yards per reception. 2 yards per yard run is strong. So yeah, I'm buying Calvin Ridley, man. I think you should be in on Calvin Ridley. I do think, I'm not ready to say he's that guy, but I do think he has league-winning upside, and the role is undeniable, man. I think the role is undeniable for Ridley right now. Hopefully Levis can continue to take a step forward here in the rest of the season too. But even with Mason Rudolph, Ridley was fine. Should I give Kamara for Nico straight up? This is a fair deal. I mean, this is the number 2 running back number 4 running back rest of the season. For right now, the wide receiver 1 rest of the season, he'll probably move down or up inside the top 5, Nico. But yeah, if you need a wide receiver, I think I would probably. I feel like Kamara's a little bit safer as long as his body holds up with this workload. I mean, the role for Kamara is crazy. Guys, this is the eighth consecutive season. 8 straight seasons. Back to 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 back seasons for Alvin Kamara, ranking top 3 among running backs in target share. 8 straight years. You do not see anyone do anything for 8 straight years in the NFL. I mean, truly incredible. And the target share for Kamara has actually been higher than that since all these injuries for the Saints. I mean, he's getting wide receiver usage. He has at least 5 catches. At least 5 catches every single game since week 4. In most of those games, he's getting 6. I mean, really crazy stuff for Kamara. The role is just insane. And Achan's in kind of a similar role right now with Tua back too, which is why Achan ranks so high rest of season as well. But yeah, I think I'd probably still take Nico over Kamara. Trade CeeDee for Achan. Yeah, I think it's a pretty good deal. I would take Achan over CeeDee if I could make that one happen. And this is part of the reason. This is a good question. I'm glad I saw that comment. By the way, I'm locking in the comments on this live stream. I'm going to try to get to as many comments as I can over the next hour as we talk through some trades, add drop decisions as we gear up, try to win our fantasy leagues down the stretch here with the trade deadlines approaching in most leagues. But this is part of the reason trade advice is so hard is players have different values in different leagues. You know, like this trade that was just commented on the TikTok live, someone's able to ship CeeDee Lamb to get Achan. I would do that in a second. Definitely. The reason I think CeeDee Lamb's a hold is I don't think in most leagues you can get that done. I don't think you're getting that much for CeeDee Lamb. Who would you trade? Who would you recommend trading Zay Flowers for? I'm in win now mode 3 and 7. Yeah, I definitely think Pickens is an improvement. I think Ridley too. I think Pickens and Ridley. We have them both over Zay Flowers rest of season. They both have very good schedules rest of season, and they're both through their buys. So Ridley and Pickens definitely stand out to me as wide receivers to try to target if you're in win now mode, and they also can help you win your leagues. If you're in win now mode, you haven't clinched the playoffs yet, and you really got to churn out some wins to get in the playoffs. Because remember, all the strategy in fantasy is all that matters is the fantasy playoffs, assuming you make it that far. So first you got to get in, and then you got to optimize for the playoffs. But a lot of times this time of year, you can really do both by getting players that have already had their bye. And a lot of players, like half of players basically have had their bye. And if you need wins, you can't afford losses, then trade for those players that also have good schedules rest of the season. Pickens and Ridley definitely check those boxes. Why do you want Jonathan Brooks? Because the schedule is the second best running back schedule in the fantasy playoffs. I think he's one of the highest upside handcuffs in fantasy still. A.J. Brown or CeeDee Lamb rest of the season, it's A.J. Brown. It's definitely A.J. Brown over CeeDee Lamb right now. A.J. Brown still really hasn't had a bad game. I think he's had one bad game? He had one bad game, but he got hurt in that game. 46% of snaps, or maybe that game just wasn't close. I forget if he got hurt or if the game was a blowout. Maybe it was both. Every game where A.J. Brown's played more than half the snaps, he has at least 13 and a half points, at least 5 catches. He's gone over 80 yards in all of those games. I mean, A.J. Brown has an extremely high floor for a receiver and a massive ceiling too. And I don't think we haven't really seen the true ceiling for A.J. Brown yet, partially because the Eagles have had such a cake schedule, such an easy schedule. I mean, look at these teams. They played the Jags, the Cowboys without Dak Prescott. They played the Giants, the Browns. They've had a really easy schedule recently, and that's led to not a lot of passing volume. Look at Jalen Hurts. His passing volume is near the bottom of the league. Guys, Jalen Hurts, his pass attempts per game ranks 34th in the NFL. 26 pass attempts per game for Jalen Hurts. In closer games, that's going to go up. And that's going to be good for A.J. Brown. I think I would take A.J. Brown over Lamb rest of the season. I'm still in on Lamb, though. Again, I still think the schedule's good. The target share is going to be there for Lamb. Would you trade Chase, Devontae Smith, and Walker for Kamara, Lamb, and Pickens? Let's do this one here. Kenneth Walker's a really interesting one. They're coming off the bye. We'll plug this one in the trade analyzer. By the way, if you are live on TikTok right now, guys, come to the YouTube live. I'm telling you, link is right in the TikTok bio. I can share screen on the YouTube live. I got the trade analyzer up right now, and it's easier for me to pull up comments on screen too. I will get to comments from both lives. Appreciate everyone in this live stream right now. We're heading into week 11. This is the home stretch, man, and I feel like this is the most energy I have personally had, as a content creator and someone who's been in this space for over 4 years now. At this time of the year, I'm in the hunt in every single league. Last year, I definitely was in a worse spot across my leagues than this year for Kamara, Lamb, and Pickens. All right, we got Chase. Oh, we got Devontae Smith too. Also, if you guys are talking about sleeper leagues in the YouTube live, let me know what your sleeper username is, and I can sync your league to the app on this live stream, and I can get an even more personalized insight for you. So if you're asking about trade advice for a sleeper league, let me know your sleeper username in the live stream comment. All right, we got Kamara, Lamb, and Pickens. I mean, this is a haul. You got to think the Pickens, Kamara, Lamb side wins this one. I know Chase is the best player in the trade. I don't think Pickens is that far off. Yeah, I mean, it's a fair trade. This is a fair trade. I would prefer Kamara over Walker, though. And I would prefer Chase over Lamb and Pickens, but I would prefer Lamb and Pickens over Devontae Smith. So, yeah, it's a fair trade. I do like the Pickens side here. I do. Thoughts on Pacheco rest of the season? Yeah, so let's talk about the Chiefs, man, because I don't have any sells on the TikTok live up. I have some buys. I think CeeDee Lamb's a buy because I think you can buy low on him in a lot of leagues. He's got a great schedule, and he's still probably going to have over a 30% target share rest of the season. But one of the sells that is crystallizing for me is Travis Kelce, especially if you're already in the fantasy playoffs, because Kelce projects his tight end one this week. He's probably going to project his tight end one basically every week left that the Chiefs care about. I just don't think there's that many more weeks maybe that the Chiefs care about. That's not going to be good for Kelce. It's not going to be good for Pacheco either. Kareem Hunt's played well. The whole thing for Pacheco and the whole thing for Hunt right now that is so valuable for fantasies, they're in these workhorse roles on one of the better offenses in the NFL, behind one of the better offensive lines in the NFL, but it's really just the role. It is massive. They're getting massive rush shares and big target shares. You look back at the role that Pacheco had week 1, 75% rush share, 11% target share, and the next week, 60% rush share, 22% target share on the Chiefs. I mean, that's an incredible role, right? And it's been similar for Hunt. Kareem Hunt has had an incredible role. I mean, he had 10 targets this past week, 7 catches, 65 yards, didn't score a TD, was top 10 running back. And we talked about this all season, but when you see guys ranking the top 10 at their respective positions without scoring touchdowns, you want those guys. Those are the guys you want. Those are the guys with incredible floor ceiling combos. Obviously, Kareem Hunt has a great chance at a touchdown every week. He's got a great schedule coming up over the next couple of weeks. But I'm nervous about this whole Chiefs offense, man, for the fantasy football playoffs. That really goes back to Kareem Hunt, Travis Kelce, DeAndre Hopkins. I think all of these guys are likely to help you make the playoffs. Pacheco's going to be back at some point in the next 3 weeks. Chiefs, I think we're slight underdogs versus the Bills. It's in Buffalo. Might be 2 or 3 point underdogs. Let me pull it up. The game's obviously projected to be close. Of course, the Chiefs will somehow just find a way to win randomly at the end. I cannot believe they won this past week. I mean, blocking a kick on the last play. That was a trap game too versus the Broncos. This is not a trap game, versus the Bills. This is a Super Bowl type matchup here, AFC Championship type matchup here between the Chiefs and the Bills. The Bills are favored by 2.5, so maybe we see the Chiefs get their first loss. But then they get the Panthers, the Raiders. Those are 2 automatic wins. What are they, 9-0 right now? They still have their bye was in. Let me pull this up. Yeah, they're 9-0. So they're going to be at worst in the next 3 weeks, 11-1. And if the Bills win this week, there's a chance that they still have to play to get that 1 seed if the Bills keep winning. But they're going to be 11-1. Then they have a matchup versus the Chargers, Browns, Texans, Steelers, Broncos. Like, how many of those games are they really going to lose? I think there's still a good chance they're not going full throttle with their 35-plus-year-olds. Hopkins, not 35-plus, but he's over 30. Kareem Hunt, Pacheco, who's coming back from injury, Kelce. I just don't think they're going to be full throttle in week 16, 17 when it matters most. So, yeah, if I'm already in the fantasy playoffs, I'm looking to offload some of these Chiefs guys. I think they're interesting buys for teams that need to make the playoffs. And then Pacheco, I don't know what to think about Pacheco. Oh, super wide range of outcomes. But for all the reasons I was just saying about some of these other guys, he's likely going to miss this week. I'd be shocked if he played this week. I don't think he's going to be back for the matchup versus the Panthers. Maybe he's back for that matchup versus the Raiders, but it's possible he misses these next 3 games, especially with how well Kareem Hunt's playing. And then when he comes back, is he really going to step into this workhorse role with how well Hunt's played? Or are they going to keep both guys fresh? heading into the fantasy football, not the fantasy football, the actual playoffs. We got to step out of fantasy football world sometimes because how teams deploy players has a lot to do with their incentives. And the Chiefs are locked into a third straight Super Bowl. That's the only thing they care about. It's part of the reason I'm very, very nervous about some of these Chiefs guys in the fantasy playoffs, especially if they win this week, man. If they go 10-0 and they beat the Bills, they get a 3-game lead for the 1 seed. They basically, if the Chiefs win this week, they get the 1 seed. Because they're not really 10-0 at that point. They're 12-0. They're not losing to the Panthers. They're not losing to the Raiders. So now they're 12-0 in week 14. At that point, they might have already secured the 1 seed, at least theoretically. That's not good for fantasy. Why should I keep Lamb? Because he got a 35% target share this week. He gets the Texans this week. He's going to explode. Versus the Texans. Trade Pacheco and Goddard for Swift. Or Swift and Goddard for Murray. Yeah, I prefer sending Pacheco and Goddard than Swift and Goddard, for all the reasons I just explained. I'm kind of out on Pacheco, talking through it. Why should I keep DJ Moore? Because the Bears have one of the best wide receiver playoff schedules out there. Second best, arguably. Trade Lamb and Devontae Smith for Neighbors and Reed. Lamb and Devontae Smith for Neighbors and Reed. I think that Daniel Jones probably done. It's probably Drew Lock now. Hard to know exactly what that means for Malik Neighbors, but it's probably not going to impact Neighbors that much. There's even a potential it helps him. So yeah, I do like Neighbors more than Lamb rest of the season. So you're getting the best player in the trade. I don't know how I feel about trading away Devontae Smith. I mean, I don't hate it. We have him pretty low in the rest of the season rankings, down at wide receiver 30. They have an interesting schedule rest of the season still. He's really only had 2 bad games that he's played in. One of them was last week, but we just looked at the pass volume for the Eagles. They rank Jalen Hurts ranks 34th in pass attempts per game. I mean, that's not great. Josh Downs and Rico Dowdle for James Conner. Yeah, I would do that. I like Josh Downs, by the way. Josh Downs is in an incredible role. And it seems like this is a lost season for Michael Pittman. We got Josh Downs, a top 25 wide receiver. But James Conner, Trey Benson, one of these 2 running backs is going to win leagues. I don't know if I've seen a prettier fantasy football playoff schedule. They get the Pats in week 15, then the Panthers in week 16. I don't think this is. Let me pull this up. Pats played the Bears this week. They really rank 11th best. They're allowing 24 points per game. That's the Packers. Let's go to the Pats here. Yeah, 24 points per game. The Pats are allowing the 4th most rushing yards per game. And then they get the Panthers. Got to feel pretty good about James Conner, Trey Benson in their odds to win leagues. I think Benson should be rostered in all leagues. Sam, I have to hear your opinion. Should I look to trade Dobbins away or trust he will still produce? Yeah, I mean, I was nervous about the Gus Edwards returning in week 10, and it kind of came to fruition. Like, Dobbins is suddenly not in as big of a role as he was in. 8.5 points this week. He at least had 3 catches to save his fantasy day a little bit. This was his lowest snap share since week 3. This was his lowest rush share since week 2. Actually, since week 1. I mean, the target share was still there, and the routes were 72% route participation strong. So he's still going to be the lead back. But Gus Edwards is going to vulture touchdowns, is going to vulture touches. So I'm okay selling J.K. Dobbins if you can, Andrew. I think that's fine. And look at the schedule, too, coming up. I mean, the playoff schedule's not terrible, but he gets a pretty tough schedule in the next 4 weeks if you're trying to make the fantasy football finals. Any defenses I should pick up for the playoffs? Yeah, so I actually made a list of some defenses to stash here for my leagues. Let me pull this up. I do think it's sometimes hard to waste roster slots on defenses, but as each week passes now, it makes more and more sense, especially if you're in a very competitive league. This is the stuff that can actually end up making a difference down the stretch of the season. And there's some defenses I think that do make sense to stash. I have the Chargers on this list. Let's pull the Chargers defense, look at their schedule. Yeah, the Chargers, they get the Bucks in week 15. Then they get the Broncos and they get the Pats in week 17. Not the worst schedule. Actually, a pretty rough schedule over the next 4 weeks. Even the Bucks matchup, how good is that Bucks one really? The Chargers have been pretty good. recently. They've had some good matchups too, though. They actually rank second in fantasy points per game among defenses. They're an interesting one. The Falcons defense hasn't been great this season, but you look at their schedule, they get the Raiders and the Giants to open the fantasy playoffs. Desmond Ridder and then probably Drew Lock. So I like the Falcons. They've only had one good fantasy game this season, so their defense has not been good. But if I get my defense versus Desmond Ridder and Drew Lock to start the playoffs, I feel pretty good about that. They're available in a ton of leagues because they've been terrible as a defense. You probably don't need to stash them yet. The Bengals were another one. Their defense is similar to the Falcons. They've been terrible. They get the Titans, then the Browns, then the Broncos. Definitely an interesting one. They've had some good fantasy performances this season against some subpar teams. And then I had the Cardinals written down here too. Let me pull up the Cardinals. The Chargers, by the way, they're allowing the fewest points per game in the NFL. Definitely an interesting defense to stash. Yeah, and the Cardinals defense, we were just looking at the schedule for the running backs. But yeah, they get the Pats and then the Panthers in the fantasy playoffs. So all those are the defenses on my radar to stash. Let me know in the comments if you guys have other defenses that you found that make sense to stash. But those are the ones in my research that stood out to me. The Chargers, the Falcons, the Cardinals, the Bengals. Will B-Rob play? I'm not sure. I lean towards no. All right, let's get to, do you think Swift is a sell win now mode? If you're in win now mode, let's take a look at this schedule quick for Swift. Yeah, probably sell. Rough, you get the Vikings and the Lions twice. This is a rough schedule coming up for the Bears. I mean, I know they changed offensive coordinators, and I'm in on these receivers because they're going to be trailing in these games. They get some tough matchups here in terms of the offenses they're playing against. The Packers, the Vikings, the Lions, and the 49ers. That's who they play. They play the Vikings and the Lions twice in the next month and a half. The Lions are going to score versus the Bears. These defenses have been pretty good versus running backs too. I think it's okay to sell if you're in win now mode. And I'm buying guys like George Pickens, Calvin Ridley, even CeeDee Lamb. I think Tyreek for Lamb. Yeah, I'd prefer Lamb over Tyreek. I think I saw someone put the sleeper username in. Let me go back up to that comment here. Here we go. Let's take a look at this. So again, if you guys are in the YouTube live, we're live on TikTok and YouTube right now. By the way, shout out to everybody in this live stream right now. If you're watching live on YouTube, guys, smash the like button. Hit the subscribe button. It helps me out way more than you realize. If you are watching live on TikTok, guys, hit the follow button. It does not show me your comment if you aren't following. That's how TikTok works. But also come to the YouTube live, because on the YouTube live, I can share a screen. I can pull up comments on screen, just a little bit better of a viewing experience. Link is right in the TikTok bio. All right, we're about to sync this Jacob's League here to the Walter Picks app. If you guys haven't checked out the Walter Picks app yet, I mean, it's not too late to check it out. It is a free app. I've spent the last 4 years of my life helping build this app. And it's going to help you in fantasy. It's going to help you in props. The link is in the TikTok bio and the YouTube description. All right, Buffalo and Friends. Let's check this out in the Trade Analyzer. And part of the reason the Walter Picks app is so powerful is when you sync your league, you not only get insight into the trade value, but also how this trade impacts your team rest of season, which actually, in my mind, is more important than this arbitrary idea of trade values. All right, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Devontae Smith. I'm sure there's a lot of people struggling with Marvin Harrison Jr. out there. I know Devontae Smith's coming off a down week. Oh, yeah, you're getting Nico. I think this is probably going to be a good trade. Let me see if I can find this team. Let me just see if I can add him like this. Yeah, I mean, you got to do this. Look at this. Not only are you getting more trade, this is the perfect type of trade to go try to do. Where like I can see this, I don't know who this I don't think this is the team that actually had Nico Collins, but I could see this making sense potentially for another team out there too. Yeah, like ultimately the trades that get done are the trades that both sides can rationalize helping them. And a lot of the times it's these 2-for-1 trades where one team has no good receivers, and Marvin Harrison Jr. and Devontae Smith will maybe start for them. But you have plenty of good receivers. And one of these guys is on your bench. And you can upgrade to Nico Collins, who might be the wide receiver 1 rest of season. Again, don't underestimate what Nico could do here down the stretch. He gets the Ravens in the fantasy football finals. But I really think he's matchup proof. We have already sort of seen that this season. He's balled in some of the tougher matchups he's had. He ranks number 2 in fantasy points per game. He's 21.3 points per game. Steph Diggs is out now, and we haven't seen Nico without Diggs yet. But Nico should get close to a 30% target share rest of the season. It sounds like he's fully healthy too. He's going to practice all week this week. This trade not only helps you rest of the season, but also the playoffs. in week 15 through 17. Forced to start Ramondre. Thoughts? Yeah. I mean, thoughts and prayers for everyone forced to start Ramondre. He's actually had a decent stretch here. But I'm still kind of out on the upside for Ramondre to win leagues. Let me pull this up. I think he had like his most efficient game. Yeah, so he had 8.7 points this week. Finally had some rushing yards. He was at 3.7 yards per carry, which was the best he's been at since week 5. I mean, this path offensive line is so bad. It's so hard for these running backs. They actually have a great schedule. Wow. Didn't realize how great this schedule was. Cardinals and Bills have both been great matchups for the running backs. Maybe he does have league winning upside for Ramondre if he stays in this role. So should I trade Brooks for Tillman? I'm 7-3. Sleeper username Owen Donovan. Let's check this out. Again, if you're watching live on YouTube, guys, and you're talking about sleeper leagues, if you give me the username, I can sync your league to the app on this live stream and give you an even better answer to your questions. And this is part of the reason. Just type in Brooks. Part of the reason that it's sometimes hard as a content creator to give the best advice because everyone's league has different settings. Everyone's team is in different situation, which is why it's nice I can sync the league to the app on the live and look through it here. All right, so we're trading Brooks for Tillman. Let's take a look at this. I still think Brooks is a hold. Let's take a look at the squad here too. You have Bijan and Chase Brown. You really don't need Brooks. Tracy too. So that's good. You have Neighbors on bye this week. Waddle and McConkey, not terrible options. Yeah, this probably does make sense for you. Tillman and Judy, I like a lot this week specifically versus the Saints. Yeah, this is worthwhile. I still think Jonathan Brooks, has a better chance to win you your league in the fantasy playoffs. It seems like there's a chance that it's going to take a Chuba Hubbard injury. If you're not locked into the playoffs yet in your league, I think this is fine. And Tillman, he has potential in the playoffs too. He gets the Bengals and the Dolphins the last 2 weeks. This is a good matchup for the passing attack of the Browns coming out of the bye versus the Saints. Then they get a tough stretch. This is close, but yeah, I think this is a fine trade to make. CeeDee and Tracy for K9 and Pickens. Man, Lamb versus Pickens rest of the season. Tracy versus K9 rest of the season. Those are both kind of close. I think I'd probably still go Lamb over Pickens rest of season. Yeah, I would. And then Kenneth Walker and Tracy, I think it's wow, we got Kenneth 2 spots behind Tracy. Kenneth has fallen a lot in these rest of season rankings. Back-to-back games under 15 points. He doesn't have the worst schedule rest of season. 77% snap share last time out, 76% rush share. The target share has dropped off a little bit. Tracy's schedule is pretty good. I think I prefer Tracy just slightly over K9. I prefer Lamb just slightly over Pickens. So yeah, I guess I would go the Lamb Tracy side. I don't think I would trade those 2 guys away for Pickens and K9. It's close though. It's definitely a fair trade. What wide receiver or running back could I get for Burrow? Yeah, you're probably not going to get a ton. By the way, in general, trade strategy, I think trying to trade away quarterbacks is pretty smart, especially in a lot of leagues. You can just go add Justin Herbert for free right now. You could add him last week for free. You can just go add Russell Wilson or Bo Nix. These guys project as top 10 QBs this week. You can stream quarterbacks this season pretty effectively. There's really only 3 or 4 quarterbacks you'd need to start every week. It's all the rushing guys, the top 4 here in the rest of the season rankings: Lamar, Hurts, Allen, Jaden Daniels. And some of these guys, Bo Nix, I think we have projected ahead of Jaden Daniels this week. I don't think that's that crazy. Same thing with Herbert and Russ. So yeah, I think trading away quarterbacks, if you can get value for them, which in a lot of leagues you really can, is pretty smart. And yeah, you got to be realistic, obviously, with what you can get. You're not going to get Pickens, a guy like him, for Joe Burrow. Maybe you get one of those Bears receivers with their schedule. I don't hate that. Maybe you can go get DJ Moore, Rome Odunze for Joe Burrow. That seems realistic. Cedric Tillman feels realistic. Juwan Jennings maybe feels realistic. Juwan Jennings is a solid wide receiver too, rest of the season, guys. He had a 32% target share this past week. First game we've seen him without Ayuk. He gets a great schedule down the stretch. 49ers are going to have a lot to play for down the stretch too. Achane and Adams for Kamara and Neighbors, half PPR. Achane and Adams. for Kamara and Neighbors. Wow. I mean, these are the types of trades I don't get how these ones get done. Like, how do both sides of this trade see, like, if you're trading the exact same amount of players and positions, then like one side is just like kind of clearly losing. I guess this one's close, so it's not super clear. I like HN more than Kamara. HN is almost like a younger, more explosive version of Kamara in a slightly lesser workload, but on a better team. So yeah, I prefer HN over Kamara. I don't think either of their schedules like matter that much for the roles that they're in. And then Adams versus Neighbors, I want Neighbors there over Adams. I do want Adams still, though. And I think both Adams and Garrett Wilson are, back end wide receiver ones rest of the season. They get a great playoff schedule. Jags and Rams to open the fantasy football playoffs, then a potential shootout versus the Bills, who have been pretty good versus receivers this season. It's a fair deal. I think I'd lean towards the HN Adams side over the Kamara and Neighbors side. Happy PR changes things like a little bit, but not much, I guess, with these guys. I get Hurts, Henry, Tracy for JJ as HN. I already have Nico, Neighbors, Bijan. I don't think I like it. I would keep Justin Jefferson and HN. I mean, he's a 6-person league. This team is insane. But it's hard to know, too, how many teams are in some of these leagues. That obviously has big implications. But I do think that Derrick Henry's a sell. I think Derrick Henry and Travis Kelce are sells right now. We got Derrick Henry down to number 9 in the running back rest of season rankings. He still ranks number 1 in fantasy points per game this season. He ranks number 1 in rushing yards per game. He ranks number 1 in rushing touchdowns per game. But he does have a much tougher schedule coming up. He still has the bye. That week 15 matchup looks great. I don't love the week 16 matchup versus the Steelers. The week 17 matchup versus the Texans is definitely not ideal. I think in a lot of leagues too, you could still like straight up trade Derrick Henry for HN, and I would do that. Part of the reason I think both Henry and Kelce are sells is the value you should get in return. I'm not saying these guys suck. You can get a ton for them because they've been so good. And I think there's some reason to be concerned. There's no receiving role, obviously, for Henry. And Kelce, I think, will get rested to some extent in the fantasy football playoffs, like he did last year. He went under 10 points in every single fantasy football playoff game last year. Trade Tyreek or London for Lamb. Yeah, I would trade either of those guys for Lamb. Probably Tyreek, though, instead of London. Tyreek is dealing with like a serious injury. There's a lot of risk with Tyreek, it feels like. We have not seen Tyreek go over 15 points since week 1. Henry for Gibbs. We got Gibbs 2 spots below Henry. That one's really close. Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, by the way, if one of them gets hurt, I mean, you win your league if you have the other one. Like, I don't think there's more contingent upside among running backs. I think Blake Corum comes to mind, Braylon Allen, but like it's really Gibbs and Montgomery. If one of them goes down and the other one assumes a workhorse role, they're going to win leagues. They have the Bills in the first week of the fantasy playoffs. The Bills are getting crushed by running backs. They're allowing so many receptions to the running backs. I mean, honestly, looking at this, I think I might take Gibbs over Henry rest of the season, just because of this week 15 matchup, the better playoff schedule here for Gibbs. Bradley, no need to spam. I think I would rather Jay Jettas than AJ Brown with Hurts stack, but it's close. Thoughts on Burrow rest of the season? You let me pull up Burrow. We're locked into the comments on this live stream, guys. Shout out to everybody in this live right now. We're heading into week 11. I haven't seen very many waiver questions, but Jawan Jennings, definitely a very good guy to go try and add. Audric Estime, if you're in need of a running back, he is probably the starter for the Broncos the rest of the season now. And then at QB, Herbert, Bo Nix, Russell Wilson, all are top 10 quarterbacks projected in week 11. Thoughts on Burrow rest of the season? Yes, I mean, Burrow's been balling. Hopefully T. Higgins comes back. He's still a question mark for this week. Back-to-back weeks, over 30 points for Joe Burrow. He's been a top 2 QB back-to-back games, 428 yards and 4 TDs versus the Ravens. There's a couple quarterbacks. I think it's Kirk Cousins versus the Bucs, and it's Joe Burrow versus the Ravens. You combine what they've done against these opponents, and it's wild stuff. What is this? This is over 800 yards. Joe Burrow has over 800 yards and 9 touchdowns versus the Ravens. He lost both of those games. I mean, pretty crazy stuff when you really think about it. But yeah, Joe Burrow is a top 8 QB projected every single fantasy football playoff week. So yeah, he's a guy that you kind of have to start every week. You probably don't need to stream if you have Burrow. He's up to number 4 points per game rest of the season. He obviously does get to play the Ravens every week or even for the rest of the season. He's already got both those games out of the way. He scored 34 plus in both, basically, and somehow lost. But yeah, Titans, Browns, Broncos, not the best fantasy football playoff schedule. It's not the worst one either. Should I sell Lamb since Dak's out for the rest of the season? It depends what you get for Lamb. It depends. I really still think Lamb's a hold because he's still at a 35% target share. Herbert or Bo Nix? Yeah, I lean Herb over Nix. I think Justin Herbert is the QB you really want right now off the waivers. I was able to add him in a couple of leagues over the last couple of weeks in preparation for this stretch that Herbert's about to be on. The Chargers have leaned more pass heavy over the last month. And really since their bye, they've been a bit more pass heavy. Last week, they didn't throw that much. It took a step back. Only 18 pass attempts. That was the least they've had since week 3. But look at their schedule coming up. They're not going to be able to be extremely run heavy in these matchups. They get the Bengals and the Ravens. I mean, these Bengals and Ravens teams, they're built for shootouts because their offenses are so good and their secondaries are so bad. So we got 2 massive shootouts for Herbert coming up. His 2 best matchups really of the season for fantasy coming up. And then he gets the Falcons, who have been a good matchup. Then he gets the Chiefs in a game that should be high scoring. And then he starts the fantasy playoffs versus the Bucks. There's no QB with a better schedule in the next 5 weeks than Justin Herbert. And he's available for free in a lot of leagues off the waiver wire. He's also very easy to go trade for in a lot of leagues. Yeah, Peyton, no need to spam. We are definitely buying McCaffrey. Herbert or Russ? Yeah, I'm going Herb. Peyton, chill. We don't spam in the YouTube live. Who is a good target to trade Nick Chubb or J.K. Dobbins for? Yeah, so we talked about a bunch of good targets on this live. I still think Breece Hall is worth buying. I still think Tony Pollard / Tajay Spears are interesting trade targets that are pretty realistic to go get. Like, they're not going to cost a ton. They still have a pretty good fantasy playoff schedule. They get the Bengals, Colts, Jags. I still think there's a lot of contingent upside here, too. If one of these guys misses time, we've already seen it this year with Spears missing time. But if Pollard or Spears miss time, the other one can win leagues with his schedule down the stretch in the fantasy football playoffs. Both have a lot of pass catching upside. Gibbs and Monty, Connor and Benson. Christian McCaffrey is absolutely someone you should be trying to buy. McCaffrey's back, guys. He's running back 1 rest of the season. He's running back 1 this week. He's running back 1 basically every week for the rest of the fantasy season. I mean, just like that, he's getting an 80% snap share, 88% snap share, guys. He only had 13 carries, 60% rush share. That was a lot of Brock Purdy running, though. He still had 6 catches, 68 yards. Both those were ranked first per game. Obviously, small sample size there, but it's what we've seen from McCaffrey in the past. So, yeah, I mean, you want McCaffrey on your teams for sure. Puka or Neighbors? Man, that one's actually pretty close. I think it's Neighbors over Puka, but it's close. I'd go Neighbors over Lamb as well. Guys, Neighbors is going to lead the NFL in target share this season. Like, he's just going to. As long as he keeps up, around 30% target share rest of the season, it's not even going to be close. Let me pull this up quick. We got this new feature in the Walter Picks app. You're watching live on YouTube right now. You can click into these to see the rankings. Right now, League Neighbors leads the NFL in target share with 36.4% target share this season. The only other 2 players over 30% are A.J. Brown and Justin Jefferson. He has a 4.4% lead. I mean, you want Malik Neighbors. They're scheming him so much volume. Thoughts on Spears? Yeah, I think he's got league-winning upside. A lot of contingent value. Dropped Darnold for Herbert. Yes, I just did this before Week 10 in one of my leagues in preparation for the upcoming schedule for Herbert. Definitely Herbert over Sam Darnold. Cedric Tillman definitely has a lot of upside. He's a good sleeper. I honestly think Judy's a good sleeper too. I think both Judy and Tillman are decent sleepers, especially this week against the Saints without Marshawn Lattimore. But they have a decent end to the fantasy football season as well. Sutton or Downs? Yeah, so Sutton was on my do not draft list. That one has not aged great. There's been moments of the season where it's looked great. There's been a more recent stretch where it's looked bad. I mean, he's had at least 17 points in 3 straight. He's up to still only 12 points per game this season. I mean, he's on a good stretch. A couple of tough matchups coming up. He gets the Chargers in the fantasy football playoffs. I think I would go Downs. Yeah, we have Downs a few spots ahead of him rest of the season still. How do you feel about Dobbins? I'm pretty nervous on Dobbins. I got CMC and Kittle for Connor, Kupp, Kelsey, Week 10. Thoughts? Love it. Absolutely love it. I think now is the time to trade away Travis Kelce, even though he projects as tight end 1. Even though he ranks as tight end 2 rest of the season. He projects as tight end 1 or tight end 2 each of the next 4 weeks. But then he gets a tough schedule and potentially some rest in the fantasy playoffs. Hold on to Lamb. Yeah, I think hold Lamb. I'm not trading away CeeDee Lamb. Depends what you get, obviously. I do think trading away Dobbins makes some sense if you can get something for him. I get CMC. He gets Neighbors and Swift. Yes or no? Yeah, it's a yes. It's a yes. You're getting the best asset in fantasy football. And Neighbors is great. I want Neighbors. I want Chris McCaffrey more. I think the floor ceiling for McCaffrey is even higher. And then you also look at the schedule for McCaffrey, and it's not like the schedule matters that much for McCaffrey, but he gets the Bills in a couple of weeks. Like, this is not a bad schedule for CMC. I think I would take CMC over Neighbors. And I don't really care about Swift getting tossed in this trade. At this point of the season, too, you got to stop holding on to trade value. Ignore trade value to some extent. Leverage it to your advantage. Like Swift, he has trade value. Is he starting for you, though, in the fantasy playoffs? Because if not, trade him. You don't need trade value on your bench to win leagues. You need the best starting lineup possible. What value? Why are you trading for a Dunze LMAO? Yeah, because you gotta come for cost. Part of the recommendations that I try to give for trade advice, and trade advice is super hard as a content creator to give good trade advice to a lot of people in a lot of different situations and leagues, and a lot of these players are valued differently across leagues. But part of the reason I mix in some low-cost guys is because they're low cost. Like, I think there's a lot of guys right now that can win leagues that you can go get pretty cheap. And Dunze is definitely on that list. Roman Dunze has the second best wide receiver playoff schedule. He's got the second best rest of season schedule among receivers. The Bears have the second best rest of season schedule. They have the best fantasy playoff schedule. They get the Vikings, the Lions, and the Seahawks. Those are all bottom 4 defenses versus receivers this season. They just fired their offensive coordinator. These are all shootouts. Vikings, Lions, twice. And they play them both twice in the next 6 games. So, yeah, I think Dunze is a clear buy. And he's just not hard to get. He's only had 2 games over 15 points this season. He's not likely, getting started every week in most leagues. In some leagues, he's probably available for free on the waiver wire. So, yeah, I think Dunze is a clear buy at that cost. You shouldn't have to give too much to get him. And the same thing goes for DJ Moore. I'm a little bit more out on Keenan. I feel like he's just a little bit toast with the age. Estime or Javonte this week. Yeah, it's Estime over Javonte this week and rest of the season. Jonathan Brooks over Chuba. Yeah, I mean, we got to see, but I think there's definitely a chance. I absolutely still think there's a chance. I think Brooks is definitely worth still holding on to if you can. It depends what you can get to in a trade. I would not drop Jonathan Brooks. They both have a great playoff schedule. It's still possible Brooks just doesn't play this season. I mean, the Panthers are incentivized to tank anyways, so we'll see. But I think that with the schedule and the talent profile for Jonathan Brooks, he still can win leagues. Trade away Tyreek or hold. I think if you can get enough for the name value for Tyreek, it does make sense to trade. We got Tyreek down to wide receiver 20 rest of season right now. Tyreek has not been over 15 points since week 1. And you have to start. If you haven't, you have to start. He's been over 11 points at least 3 straight games. He did score this past week. He still played 86% of the snaps. Like, I still think there's a ceiling every week for Tyreek, even though we haven't seen it since week 1. And I'm willing to throw out all these games without Tua. And I'm willing to chalk some of this up to him being injured, which we just found out about, which is a little frustrating. But yeah, depending on what you can get for Tyreek, I think he probably is a sell. Hawkinson or Njoku? I think it's Njoku over Hawkinson. I think that Hawkinson, Njoku, McBride, Kraft, these are the tight ends I'm trading for, especially if you can get rid of Kelsey and then go get McBride or go get Hawkinson or go get Njoku or go get Kraft. I think Kraft's a little bit of a tier below these other guys. And then upgrade somewhere else. I think that's a really sharp move. Njoku has a great schedule down the stretch. Njoku, guys, he was the top tight end in fantasy in the back half of last season, and he's got a chance to do it again. I mean, he's been pretty consistent over the last 3 weeks, over his last 3 games coming out of the bye. He's got a tough schedule over the next month, but then a great fantasy football playoff schedule. Chiefs, Bengals, Dolphins, all good matchups for tight ends. McBride has still not scored a receiving touchdown this season. He has 2 rushing touchdowns. He's got a great schedule down the stretch as well. The whole Cardinals offense really does. Hawkinson in his full role last week, and there's still room, by the way, for this role to go up, guys. He only played 46% of snaps. He played 46% of snaps and still had a 24% target share. What happens when he gets back to the 70% snap share? He's going to be clearing 30% targets, 30% target share in some of these games when he comes back to a larger snap role. 15 points this past week. Top 5 tight end without a touchdown. exactly what you want to see. And he has pretty good fantasy football playoff schedule too. So yeah, Hawkinson, I'm definitely in on as well. And I think Tucker Kraft is a sneaky one. He gets a good matchup week 15 versus the Seahawks. He's been pretty good this season, ranks 8th best in fantasy points per game. We'll see when Musgrave is able to come back, but Gibbs' rest of season rank been dropping a bit in Walter picks. How do you feel about him? Would you shop him? I have Chase, Neighbors, Collins, Pickens at wide receiver. Yeah, you can trade one of those guys. So I could likely upgrade Gibbs' thoughts. Yeah, so I get very excited looking at Gibbs' week 15 matchup. Ultimately, you might need a David Montgomery injury for him to win leagues, which is a little bit scary. He's only been over 20 points twice this season. And his ceiling is a little bit capped because he's not in this massive role that he would be in, obviously, if Montgomery was out. He's still a very good running back to have. He's still a top 12 running back. Rest of the season, running back 11. But yeah, if you could go upgrade to Achane or Bijan or Kyron or JT or Saquon, McCaffrey, obviously, with one of those receivers, I think that's probably a sharp move. Who is better long-term, Kupp or Mike Evans? Yes, we got Mike Evans ahead of Kupp like firmly right now. I think we might be a little high on Evans in the app. It's still a little uncertainty if he's coming back this week or not. But I really think like suddenly the top focus for the Bucs rest of the season is going to be getting Mike Evans to 1,000 yards. And I think he's probably going to do it. And he's not that close. He needs close to 100 yards per game to do it. I have a pretty good feeling about the upside for Mike Evans. Good rest of season schedule for the most part. Tough matchup versus the Chargers in week 15, but Baker Mayfield's been balling. I do think Mike Evans has some league winning potential, a little bit more so than Cooper Kupp. I still feel good about Kupp, though. In his role, he's had at least 15 now in 3 straight games, 7 for 80 last night. He is definitely not quite as good as Puka Nacua for fantasy. They don't have the best schedule in the fantasy playoffs, but there's at least a good floor there with Kupp. I think a higher ceiling for Evans, higher floor for Cooper Kupp. Have you talked about Debo rest of the season? No, I haven't really talked about him much. I do think Debo and Juwan Jennings, I want both of them. I think Debo's a buy. They have a great fantasy football playoff schedule. Rams, Dolphins, Lions, pretty good schedule there for receivers. 2 of those matchups are top 5 matchups. And then you also, I don't think that his ceiling is really getting priced in right now. He doesn't have a game with more than 21 fantasy points this season. And Ayuk is out. McCaffrey's obviously back. But historically in these games without Ayuk, I mean, the ceiling's massive. You just go back to 2023 game logs. If you're watching live on YouTube, again, if you're watching live on TikTok, we're also live on YouTube. Link is right in the TikTok bio. But you go back to 2023 and we had a stretch of back-to-back games over 34 points from Debo last season. I think we have a 30-plus bomb left from Debo this season without Ayuk in the lineup. Brock Purdy's been playing pretty well. Maybe it's this week, too, versus the Seahawks. This is a great matchup this week. So, yeah, I feel pretty good about Debo rest of the season. I think he's got league-winning potential for sure. And he's got a good fantasy football playoff schedule in games that could be really high-scoring versus the Rams, Dolphins, and Lions. All right, let's check this one out in the app. BTJ and Hunt for Geno. Brian Thomas Jr. and Kareem Hunt for Geno. Is it a Superflex league or something? I feel like I'm missing something here. I guess Pacheco's coming back and BTJ's been bad, but I mean Geno Smith. Let's take a look at this. Chris Mick. Tillman or Devontae? I'd go Devontae. Thoughts on DK? Yeah, I still think DK has league winning potential. I think he'll be back this week too. Let me just check the settings here. Half PPR, 1 QB. Yeah, this is a super flex league, so this makes a little bit more sense now. You have Caleb in Burrow, so I guess you're panicking on Caleb Williams, which is somewhat reasonable. And you're going to give up Brian Thomas Jr. and Kareem Hunt to go get Geno. I don't think this is a good trade off the cuff here, but we'll see. Wow, it actually does add points still to your team. Man, Geno's getting started over or Caleb Williams in all of these weeks. Not even a great schedule for Geno. I think you can get more than this for Brian Thomas Jr. and Hunt. I do think BTJ, he's going to be a boom bust option the rest of the season without Trevor Lawrence. He just is. I still think he's a great receiver. He's going to be a guy that's drafted very early next year, and he's still probably going to have some big games. But the schedule's tough, and Mac Jones is not going to get it done for the Jags. That's sort of the bottom line, I think, from this past week versus the Vikings. So this is a reasonable trade. I mean, you're giving up some trade value. You are making your starting lineup better. I would see if you can get a better quarterback, though. I'd go look for Bo Nix, Russell Wilson, Justin Herbert. I think I'd take all those guys over Geno, at least this week. And I think rest of the season. Herbert, we got Russ below Geno. Wow, Geno's actually QB9 rest of the season. Maybe I'm sleeping on Geno a little bit. DK Metcalf's going to come back. Geno leads the NFL in passing yards. He leads the NFL in passing attempts. Passing yards is really just a volume metric for passing attempts. The schedule's not that great, but I mean, these games could be kind of high scoring. First, the 49ers and the Cardinals, and the Cardinals again, then the Packers and the Vikings. These are all probably high scoring games. I kind of like this trade more looking at this and seeing where Geno's ranked the rest of the season. Maybe you can go get Herbert. He's probably tough to get in a super flex league right now. I think if you can't get Herbert or Purdy, then you do it. And you ship off Hunt and BTJ. You're not even in your starting lineup right now. Swift for Neighbors, yes. If you can give Swift for Neighbors, I mean, you're in a ridiculously soft league, and you need to execute that instantly. BTJ or DJ Moore rest of the season, I'd go DJ Moore probably. Thoughts on Puka and Chase Brown rest of the season? Yeah, I think both are potential league winners. I mean, Chase Brown is in an insane role right now. I mean, there's not very many running backs in the role that Chase Brown is in right now. He's in a top 10 running back rest of the season for us. His schedule does not matter. That's the type of role. He's in that Achane Kamara role. So that his schedule your schedule doesn't matter if you're in this role. He had 9 catches this past week, guys. That's wide. He had 9 for 52. I mean, these are wide receiver numbers. Been a top 4 running back back-to-back weeks. I mean, the role will go down. They're not going to play him 87% of snaps for every single game the rest of the season. You got to think Herbert, or I saw Leonard Fournette potentially getting signed by them. I don't think playoff Len, he is very good at this point. I don't think Khalil Herbert is too much of a threat to Chase Brown's receiving role or even his rushing role to some extent. So yeah, Chase Brown has league winning upside for sure. Pretty good schedule. Got the Cowboys and Titans on deck in week 14, 15. Then gets the Broncos week 17. Gave away London, got Cook. It's a fair trade. Should I start CMC? Yes, we're starting CMC. Yeah, drop Donald for Russ. I would drop Donald for Russ. I would prefer to drop Donald for Herbert, but Donald for Russ is fine. And I think Donald for Bo Nix even makes sense. Trade away Kamara for Montgomery and Pickens. Yep, I think this is fine. If both these guys are going to start, Matt, if both these guys are starting for you, Montgomery and Pickens, this is a fair trade, a good trade. Pickens has league winning potential for sure, and he's going to explode this week versus the Ravens. And then guess what? He gets the Ravens again in the fantasy football playoffs. This is going to be a preview of the week 16 matchup versus the Ravens. Thoughts on Mixon the rest of the season? Yeah, he's top 5. Maybe he's top 3. Mixon has yet to have a bad game. Mixon is one of the few players still this season that has not had a bad game. He ranks running back 5 rest of the season. Look at this. He got hurt in week 2, so throw that game out. He had 8 points, but he only played 46% of snaps. Every other game, Joe Mixon has more than 16.5 fantasy points. He ranks number 2 in running back fantasy points per game. He's got an amazing schedule now through week 15. Then he gets a tough matchup versus the Chiefs in the fantasy playoffs. That's a little scary. Then the Ravens in week 17. But man, I mean, the role's been incredible for Mixon. He ranks number 3 in rushing yards, number 2 in rushing touchdowns. He's got the most rushing attempts per game in the NFL. He's been seeing some targets too over his last few. So yeah, I mean, feel very good about Mixon being top 10. Do I do Henry and Reed for Bijan and Jacoby? Henry and Reed for Bijan and Jacoby. Yeah, I probably would do that. Especially if Reed is not starting for you and Jacoby's not starting for you. And you're more or less just shipping Henry off to get Bijan. I definitely prefer Bijan over Henry. I don't think you should get rid of CeeDee unless you can get a lot for him. Trade Breeze for Pickens, and I think I prefer Breeze over Pickens. Kamara and BTJ for Nico. Yeah, I'd do this. I think I would do this. Actually, I don't know. This is close. Let's see what the Walter Picks app says about this one. This one feels pretty close to me. Kamara, I think if I could do Kamara for Nico straight up, I probably would. And then BTJ and Pacheco, I think they're just kind of throwaways in this trade. You know, maybe Pacheco becomes something when he comes back. I'm just not convinced we see Pacheco in a workhorse role with how good Kareem Hunt has played. Shout out to everyone in this live stream right now, guys. I look forward to these lives all week. We're going to be live Thursday night, Sunday morning again to get ready for week 11. Hit that like button and subscribe button if you're watching live on YouTube. Smash the follow button if you're watching live on TikTok. I will not see your TikTok comment if you aren't following. That is how TikTok works. All right, let's go to the trade analyzer here. Also, we're live on YouTube too, and the link to the YouTube live is right in the TikTok bio. It's a better viewing experience. I'm literally syncing people's leagues to the Walter Picks app on the YouTube live, sharing screen to it, and analyzing trades. I can't do that on the TikTok live. I can't share a screen on the TikTok live. All right, Kamara, Brian Thomas Jr. for Nico. And Pacheco. Wow. A fair deal. Let's see the rest of your squad. You got Saquon, Tracy Jones, Bucky Irving, Rashad White too. We do a Pacheco here in the fantasy playoffs. I'm not so convinced that Pacheco is going to have a 19-point projection in the fantasy playoffs. How Kareem Hunt has played in the trend for the Chiefs so far this season. We have him coming back in week 13. But yeah, I think, you're not doing this trade for Pacheco. You're doing it for Nico. I think I lean towards doing this, but it's a fair trade. It's pretty close. I think you hold CeeDee Lamb. Trade Kamara for Terry and Tracy. I wouldn't do this one. Henry for CMC. Yes. One of these guys is capable of having 6-catch, 50-yard receiving games, and one of them is not. And they both honestly have similar touchdown ceilings. I think I would go with CMC over Henry pretty easily, in pretty much definitely in PPR. I think half PPR gets closer, and in non-PPR, that's much closer. I think it might be Henry in non-PPR leagues. Henry might be the best running back to have in PPR. Hey Sam, would you trade Daniels and Gibbs for Brees and Lamar? I think I would do this. I mean, Gibbs and Brees is pretty lateral, and I think Lamar is a pretty clear upgrade. Also, would you trade Kelsey for Njoku or Hawk? Yeah, I prefer Njoku over Hawk. I like both. And yes, I would. You should get more than that, though. Like, you should get something more than just Njoku or Hawk back for Kelsey with how those guys should be valued. But yeah, I'd like that because I think that it's a better chance Njoku and Hawkinson win fantasy leagues in the fantasy playoffs than Kelsey does. I still would probably rather have Kelsey these next 3-4 weeks to get into the fantasy playoffs. He's got a great schedule. He's in the Rashid Rice role right now. I mean, he projects as a top 2 tight end for the next 4 games. He's the number 1 tight end in 3 of those games, projection-wise. But then you get the tough fantasy playoff schedule. The Chiefs are going to be 12-1, 13-1. At this point of the season, that if they win this week too, especially if they win this week, they pretty much lock up the bye and the 1 seed. Kelsey was under 10 points all 3 fantasy football playoff games last year. I think there's a chance he does so again, especially in those latter fantasy playoff weeks. Panic on Neighbors and Kamara. No, I'm not panicked on either of those guys. So Kamara for Nico straight up with that. Yeah, I think that makes sense. You have decent backup running backs, and Nico's clearly the best receiver on your team. I mean, Nico could be the wide receiver one, not a wide receiver one, the wide receiver one, rest of the season. Thoughts on AJ Brown and Nico Collins rest of season PPR? Yeah, I talked to both these guys. Both have league winning potential. I prefer Nico, but they both have league winning potential. Would you trade Ingram, Devontae Smith, and Dowdle for Neighbors and Kincaid? Yeah, I like this too. I don't want Kincaid. Kincaid got hurt in this past game. Kincaid's been bad for fantasy. I mean, just straight up bad. Look at where he's. Oh God, he's down to tight end 20 rest of the season right now. That's brutal. Kincaid has no games over 14 points. Kincaid has only been a top 5 tight end once this entire season. He only scored 13 points that week. He had 41 yards, 3 catches, and a touchdown that game. Dawson Knox is playing a lot. These receivers are going to get healthy after the bye, probably too. Kincaid's dealing with his own injury now. If you don't need to start Kincaid though, then I like it. I mean, I would do Ingram, Devontae Smith, and Dowdle for Neighbors if it didn't impact my tight end starting lineup too much. You're saying trade for Lamb or trade away? I'm saying trade for Lamb. These are guys I think you should trade for or try to go get or hold on to on the TikTok Live. I think Herbert, Kyler, Purdy, and Russ, these are the QBs worth trying to go get off the waiver wire or for low cost in trades. For receiver, I think Lamb is a good buy low. Pickens is a good buy high. I think Calvin Ridley is a good buy high with his schedule rest of the season. I think Christian McCaffrey is a buy high. I think Brees is a decent buy low. Bijan's a pretty good buy high if you can get him. Pollard and Spears, I think, are interesting speculative upside stashes. If one of them misses time, the other one could win leagues. Gibbs and Monty, same thing. Connor and Benson, same thing. Rashad White and Bucky Irving, same thing. Jonathan Brooks, same thing. All these guys, like a lot of these guys don't cost that much to go get. and I think they can win leagues. McBride, Hawkinson, and Njoku, these are the 3 tight ends I think are worth trading for. I would try to ship away Kelsey and get one of those 3 tight ends plus something else in return. I think packaging depth for starters just generally makes sense at this time of the year. If you need to get W's to make the fantasy playoffs, trade for guys that have already had bye weeks. Trade away guys that still have bye weeks. If you are already likely to make the fantasy playoffs, look ahead at the week 15, 16, 17 matchups. A lot of these guys on my targets list are really from the week 15, 16, 17 expectations for a lot of these guys. Yeah, I feel pretty good about Hawkinson the rest of the season. Like, very good, honestly. He hasn't even played 50% of snaps yet. He had 24% target share this past week. He was a top 5 tight end last week without a touchdown. He had 8 catches, 72 yards. Didn't even play half the snaps. And you go back to last year, and maybe they keep him in this role, to keep him fresh. Last year, he played 80% of snaps on average. Some games he was over 90%. Last year, TJ Hawkinson had the 3rd most catches and the 2nd most receiving yards per game among tight ends. Like, he could be top 3 rest of the season. Wouldn't be that crazy. He's got a good fantasy playoff schedule too. All right, guys, that's my time. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back live Thursday night to talk through the banger of a Thursday night football game we have this week. We got the Eagles and the Commanders. Weatherman Sam, early weather report. Could be some heavy rain potentially in that game. Not too scared about it. So we'll be back live Thursday night, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. Time is the most valuable thing we have. Thanks for spending some time with me tonight. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you're watching live on YouTube. I'll be back live super soon. Have a good one, guys, and good luck, everybody.